Because in yoga breathing, your blood oxygen is going down and the oxygen availability is going up, but you're not pumping oxygen into your body, not at all. You're more than anything, you're relaxing, opening your air passageways, and you're allowing the oxygen that's already in your blood, which is 95 to 99%, it's more than enough. You're allowing that oxygen to release and give your body access. So when we talk about this idea of fresh oxygen and breathing and yoga breathing and oxygen, it's really silly. We're not really manipulating oxygen much at all. We're manipulating CO2, which has a very profound impact on our blood pH. It's a really profound impact on our body's its utilization, its availability to access that oxygen that's already in your blood. And again, it sounds like a small distinction, but it's an important one because most yoga teachers are teaching this completely backwards.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. As always, we've got a really great guest in store for you today. Before we dive in, I want to remind you to head on over to savannahspirit.com/contest to enter each and every week for the chance to win an $100 gift card for the Savannah Spirit store. Our topic today is about how to take our breathing to the next level. So as yogis, we understand the importance of the breath in both our yoga and our meditation practice, and we've experienced how the breath unlocks this really powerful mind-body connection. If you're like me, you may start thinking that you know all there is to know about the breath and our breathing. And this is where in today's episode, I'm really going to invite you to keep an open mind. Our guest today is Lucas Rockwood. He is a yoga teacher, a trainer, a nutritional coach, writer, and serial entrepreneur. He studied with teachers like Pattabhi Jois, and he's trained in hot yoga, Ashtanga Yoga, gravity yoga, and the Yoga Trapeze, which I personally also really love. He's the creator and founder of YOGABODY, which is an internationally renowned nutrition, education, and publishing organization that serves over 81 countries. And today we're just talking about breathing. So hi, Lucas. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Brett. Great to be here.
So I know you're going to share so many hacks with us in this episode. How to check our nostrils, which I'm really excited about hearing about, to know if we should be eating or working or sleeping. How to use our breath to wake up, which I'm fascinated to hear about, fall asleep, and so much more. But I wanted to ask you, where's the best place to start? And maybe you want to just begin by telling us a little bit about how you got so passionate about going deeper with the breath and sharing this information with folks.
When I first started practicing yoga in 2002, I just wanted to learn everything. And so there wasn't nearly as much stuff published online, but I found everything that I could. I was living in New York City at the time, and I started running around all the yoga studios and talking to all the yoga teachers and trying to figure out how all of this stuff worked. And very quickly, I found that there was lots and lots of information about different styles, but very, very little information about the things that people talk about a lot. One is the science of yoga. That term gets dropped all the time, and there's almost no science at all. And the other is yoga breathing. And every yoga teacher is always talking about breathing, but nobody is explaining why. They're not explaining what's going on. They're not explaining how to do it, why it matters. They just say breathe. In fact, people wear shirts that say just breathe. And it's not that simple. In fact, saying just breathe is sort of like saying just eat healthy. It's like, whoa, what does that mean? Does that mean paleo? Does that mean raw? I don't know. It's really complicated. And the same is true with breathing. There's a lot of different ways to breathe, and they affect your body very, very profoundly. The other thing that was really interesting for me to learn is just how profoundly and how quickly breath can impact your nervous system, your physiology. It's very fast. In many cases, it's faster than prescription drugs or illicit drugs. It's really, really quick. So I got really obsessed with it, and I started looking all around. I started asking all my yoga teachers, and I got these platitudes, which you'll hear all the time. Focus on your breath. Breathing is you do yoga poses, and that's a gateway to breathing, and breathing is a gateway to meditation's to nirvana. This kind of pop yoga platitudes that get thrown around. It's like, well, can you just tell me how to breathe. Like, why? So I breathe through my nose, but why? So I breathe slowly, but why? And what's slowly? What's fast? Nobody was defining anything. So I got really obsessed with it and really, really frustrated. Every teacher I'd ask would give me these same sort of platitudes. Oh, my teacher said do this breathing exercise, or here's this Nadi Shodhana, or here's this alternate nostril. And I do these practices, and I go to these yoga retreats. In my teacher training course, I had a very prominent breathing teacher, at least definitely one of the most top 3, maybe even the top number 1 breathing expert in the world right now, currently, and he was 15 years ago or whenever that was as well. And he also would give me really great breathing practices, but not explain the science behind it. And I'm to this day, I'm not 100% sure he understood. And that's really a shame. And that's what's going on in the yoga world. And so it took me many, many years of study, and I had to leave the yoga world to figure out what was really going on. And where I learned about it is studying science, like real science, not science of yoga, which doesn't really exist, but studying real science about breathing physiology, how breathing works, about studying things like Buteyko breathing, which is a breathing technique developed by a medical doctor, a Russian medical doctor, to treat asthma, by studying things like heart rate variability, which is looking at the electromagnetic field of the heart in relation to breath. And from that, I came to a very, very simple understanding of how the breath works. But like a lot of things, there's a famous quote, I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so I wrote you a long one. And I think that's how it is with breathing. People don't really know what they're talking about, so they just talk about a lot of stuff. And once you understand it, it's very, very simple to understand. And once you understand it, you can apply it to everything that you do in life, but most specifically and most importantly, your yoga practice, because without the breath, yoga is really just remedial gymnastics, it's remedial dance, it's remedial acrobatics, and that's fun. I actually enjoy all of those. I like to do remedial gymnastics in my free time, but if I'm going to do a yoga practice specifically, if I'm going to choose that over a gym workout or a CrossFit workout or going for a run, I would like to tap into all the benefits that this practice has to offer, and that is only facilitated when you understand and leverage the breath.
I think what you're saying is so important because it's so easy as yogis to just think we're these breath experts. I do Ujjayi breath. I practice Nadi Shodhana or Kapalabhati. And I love what you're saying. And this is one of the things I love about you, Lucas, is that you really want to understand the science behind all these things. And for people who are listening, Lucas is also an incredible expert on nutrition, and he brings this same zeal and really wanting to understand these principles and break down the science. So what is the first thing we need to know to go a little bit deeper scientifically understanding our breath?
One of the first things you need to understand about all yoga and all breathing is that nothing is prescriptive. And what I mean by that is if you go look online right now and you search yoga for cancer, you'll find a whole bunch of yoga teachers giving you yoga poses for cancer. And I'm not joking. If you search yoga for eczema, you will find yoga poses for eczema. Yoga facelift, all of this stuff exists, and that yoga is it's just not prescriptive. That's not the way it works. It's holistic. And yoga breathing as well. Now, there's lots of poses that could help you if you have cancer. Absolutely. There's lots of poses that could help you with even the vitality of your skin. Absolutely. But there's not one pose and there's not one breathing practice. But what there are is the reason I mention this, because when you go out and you search yoga breathing or pranayama or breathing practices, you'll find dozens of different practices, some of them with sort of mystical stories behind them, some of them that are just meant to be cure-all panaceas. And it's very difficult to distinguish between any of them. And here is how you distinguish. Really, really simple. You just need to think of 3 things: water, whiskey, coffee. Water, whiskey, coffee. So walking into a breathing class is just like walking into a bar. You can order water, you can order whiskey, or you can order coffee. Now, as the name suggests, these are the effects they have on your nervous system. So a water breathing practice is balancing. It's good day or night. Always a healthy choice. Can't really go wrong. We all need to drink more water. Good choice. A whiskey breathing practice knocks you out, puts you to sleep. There are absolutely times that's appropriate, and it's much healthier than whiskey. It's really great for you. It's using your body's own internal systems rather than using something that's a mild poison to put you to sleep. And on the flip side, a coffee breathing practice is stimulating, and this should be used similarly to coffee, rarely, with care, and it should be used to wake your nervous system up for periods of physical activity early in the morning and these kinds of things. As soon as I say water, whiskey, coffee, everyone goes, love whiskey, love coffee, give me that. Because what we want to be done, we want to be cranked up and we want to be bashed over the head. This is what we want. This is why we watch Netflix horror films. This is why we eat bad food. mood. We love extremes. Extremes are exciting. They make our heart pound, or they make our heart stop, and they make us sweat, and they make us cry. But the juice of a yoga practice, the juice of any mind-body mindful practice is really towing the middle line. It's really, really hard to get excited about. But if you can get excited about that middle path, if you think of a yin-yang symbol, right in the middle there, the ha and the tha, the sun and the moon, the yin and the yang, the strength and the flexibility, if you get excited about that middle path, that's where a lot of things get unlocked. And that's really what we want to focus on. So as yoga students, you'll go out there and you see all these breathing practices and you get really confused. Oh, this one's supposed to cure me of cancer. And this one is supposed to stimulate my nervous system. And this one's supposed to release DMT in my brain. And this one's supposed to make me swim in ice water. None of those things are really true. You have three different things you can do. You can balance your nervous system. You can turn on your sympathetic, your fight or flight nervous system. You can turn on your parasympathetic, your rest and digest. So water, whiskey, coffee. That's it. You can do all kinds of crazy breathing exercises. You can go in and out through your left nostril. You can have crazy mudras with your hand. You can be sitting in lotus pose. You can have hung drums and all this kind of stuff going on in the background. Great. I love it. I love all that stuff. I do it. I practice it. But it's important to remember that all you've got is water, whiskey, and coffee. In the same way you go to the bar and they have 25 different drinks behind it, all they're really serving you is water, whiskey, or coffee. They've flavored it up. They've added different things, but at the end of the day, it's going to have the same effect on your autonomic nervous system. And that effect is where the juice of yoga is. And whether you've been practicing yoga for one day or for thousands of days, it's very likely that you're misusing the breath, because our natural tendency is to overbreathe when we're beginners and to underbreathe when we're advanced. And very few people realize that advanced yoga students underbreathe quite a lot, because they can. So you'll see a very advanced student taking 1 to 2 breaths per minute. Halfway through their practice, everything gets very sleepy, very yin. It's very natural for this to happen because they are knocking themselves out. They're accidentally using whiskey breath. So when we understand water, whiskey, and coffee, we can apply it to our life and our yoga practice, realizing that what we're mainly looking for is that boring glass of water. That's really hard to choose because the coffee tastes great, the whiskey gives us a little buzz, but what we need to do is focus on balance. And in order to put that into something besides just some weird yoga guy babbling in your ear, let me give you some numbers to think about. So 4 to 6 breaths per minute is how we would quantify that water breathing practice, that balanced breathing practice.
And Lucas, if we want to give an example, because of course I'm trying to think in terms of concrete examples, would a water breath be like Ujjayi breath, for example?
Can be, but it's a great point because it doesn't have to be Ujjayi breath. It could be, it usually is. I like to use it because I find it's easier, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. And the reason I mention that immediately is because I know a lot of people listening are going to hot yoga. And in hot yoga, we wouldn't really use Ujjayi breath because it just makes you too warm. It makes you too hot. But you can still use that exact same rate of breathing. It's all about the breathing rate.
I see. So when we're talking about water, whiskey, coffee, I'm thinking about coffee as like Kapalabhati and water as Ujjayi. But what you're educating us about is that we really want to think about this in terms of ratios, breaths per minute. Is that right?
Yeah, ratio is another variable we can play with is ratio. But rate is the most impactful thing to think about with your breath. How fast or how slow are you breathing? And to give people a visual reference, think of someone who just did a 100-meter sprint or a 500-meter sprint. They finished the race and they're doubled over. They have their hands on their knees, their shoulders are squished up by their ears, and they're just
panting.
Exactly. And so if you breathe like that, you will feel like that. How will you feel? Your heart will race. You'll be in a sympathetic fight or flight nervous system state. Your nervous system responds in kind when you breathe as if. Now, alternatively, think about a monk in a cave who's been in meditation for an hour. Think about a young couple on a park bench who are falling in love and kissing for the first time, and think about their breath. It's a sigh, right? It's a belly breath. It's never up in the chest. It's dropped down low in the navel. If you breathe like them, you will feel like them. And it sounds overly simplistic. Give it 10 rounds of breath. It's profoundly impactful. It's measurable. You can strap a heart rate monitor on there. You can look at your heart rate variability. You can look at your blood pressure. You can look at your brainwave states. It happens really fast, shockingly fast. But you have to understand that almost everything in our life is stacked against us in terms of helping us to find balance, whether it's the coffee in the morning, the oversweetened breakfast. Most people are having 150 grams of carbs just for breakfast, the constant notifications on your phone, the blue light from your phone. Everything in your life is just cranking you up all day long. And it's keeping you from having these natural cycles of being cranked up and then being relaxed. And always having these periods where you wobble back and forth from your sympathetic fight or flight to your parasympathetic rest and digest. And this is what we need. So you have to understand the rates. So most people listening right now, the rate again is the variable we're really looking at. All kinds of wonderful practices to do with breathing, all of them important, love them, fun. But you need to understand what's really happening here is the fundamental underlying principle is how fast or how slow are you breathing. And right now, most of you are breathing about 8 to 12 breaths per minute. Some of you as much as 15 breaths per minute. So to get to a balanced state, we actually chop that in half. That has a balancing effect on our nervous system. So we get down to 4 to 6. Anything below 4, we'd consider a whiskey breath. Anything above 20, we'd consider a coffee breath. The breathing pattern itself is much less relevant. The ratio itself is important, but much less relevant. The biggest variable, the biggest factor affecting on your nervous system is how fast or how slow are you breathing? Are you that sprinter at the end of the race with your tongue hanging out of your mouth, or are you that young couple falling in love with a sigh on the park bench? And depending on how you're breathing, that's going to affect how you feel.
This is fascinating. And now I want to follow up on something you said earlier, which definitely piqued my interest, is that you said that often advanced yoga practitioners aren't breathing as well as they think they are. And beginners are actually doing maybe better. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
This happens a lot, and almost nobody's talking about it and nobody's aware of it. And in fact, I see a lot of advanced yoga teachers even just instructing people now to just breathe normally, just breathe naturally, relax and breathe. It's such bad advice. It's like telling a person to walk into the grocery store and just say, grab whatever looks good. I like all kinds of things that are bad for me. And we breathe in ways that are not good for us either. Here's what happens in yoga practice. When I say yoga, most of your listeners I know, because I know the kind of yoga you teach, and all of my listeners for sure, they're practicing athletic style yoga for the most part. We all do some deep stretching, some yin or some gravity classes occasionally. We do other things, but for the most part, we're practicing athletic style yoga, which means we don't want to be zonked out when we're practicing. And yet many people are breathing as if they're completely zonked out. And it's no wonder that they can barely get through sun salutes. They just want to go to the floor series and get a bunch of bolsters and pillows and do restorative yoga because they have no energy. And here's what happens as you get better. You're brand new students. So I've done a bunch of this, like sort of quantified self experiments with new students, strapping heart rate monitors on people, looking at their breathing rates, seeing what happens. Here's what happens with a new student. They come to class and they start breathing so fast. They're all doing coffee breath on accident. They're like every pose is so challenging that the whole practice is very similar to that sprinter. It's a sympathetic nervous system ride. And then you get your advanced student who's been practicing so long that they can do an entire set of 10 sun salutes, an entire standing series. They can even stand on their hands and do back bends, breathing 1-2 breaths a minute, extremely slow. And while that's interesting that they can do that, and it's certainly an accomplishment, it's a really stupid idea. If you're trying to do a 60-minute or a 90-minute athletic yoga practice, you're breathing as if you're ready to go to sleep, and you're moving your body as if you're trying to do physical activity. You're dumping a whole bunch of yin on some yang, and it's conflicting. It's not bad for you, but it's going to make your practice really, really difficult. And if you watch the progression of advanced yoga teachers, you can even see it online. You'll see people as they get older doing more and more gentle activities, more and more. They're saying that, the younger people have it wrong, that yoga should be gentle. And you'll see people almost teaching exclusively floor series. It's like, what's going on? These are the same people who used to teach really, really strong athletic practices. A lot of them unknowingly have turned their yoga practice into this 60 or 90 minute parasympathetic nervous system dump where they're barely breathing at all. So it's no wonder they don't have any energy. It's no wonder they feel like it's a meditation, because they're breathing as if they're in meditation, but they're moving as if they're doing a vinyasa yoga class.
And Lucas, are they especially prone to this because they are so advanced in yoga that the poses become easy for them, that they can do this? Is that why?
Yeah, anybody who's been practicing for more than 3 years, they almost always underbreathe. Almost always they underbreathe because they can. And it's something that you have to watch for. If you've been practicing for more than a few years, I'd encourage you to check out the rate. Again, that's the biggest variable, the rate at which you're breathing. It's probably too slow. Now, if you're doing a yin class or restorative class, or you're practicing before bed, which I like to do, I deliberately play with the rate to knock myself out. And I'll do some deep stretches, put myself to sleep. Smart idea. But for a 10 a.m. class, to knock your students out, which teachers are doing all across the globe. Students come into class, they teach them this super down-regulating practice, and they're like, great class, loved it, feel great, and I need to go sleep for the rest of the day. It's just not doing people any favors.
I would love to have you, I want to keep talking about this, and I'd love to have you mention something, or go deeper into something you mentioned about hot yoga and breathing in hot yoga. One of the experiences I had, and I know that hot yoga is a gateway and entry for many yoga students, and I don't know if this was the case for you, but it was for me back when I was crazy type A. Hot yoga, Bikram actually was the first yoga I was able to connect with because it was so physically challenging, and it met me where I was at the time. One of the things I loved about it is that because the room was so hot, I really had to focus on my breathing, because if not, I'd faint. And sometimes I feel like hot yoga gets a little bit of a bad rap, but I've always so valued it because of the lessons it taught me about the breath. And I know you earlier said something about how breathing in hot yoga a little different from breathing in normal yoga. I'd love to hear you reflect on that a little bit.
I started out as a hot yoga student as well, and my first studio was Bikram Yoga Soho in New York City, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was part of the Bikram NYC group, which has been a very influential group for probably some of your listeners have been there. And it was a really big deal for me. And the interesting thing is when I first started practicing, I was completely convinced that sooner or later, people were going to figure out that hot yoga was bad for you, because I like everything that's bad for me. Any drug, any bad food, and whatever you got, if it's bad for you, I love it, right? So I was convinced that my bubble was going to get burst someday. They were going to figure out that this is dangerous, that it's bad for you, and I liked it that much. I just figured anything like this much must be bad for me. And the opposite has been true, which is super, super interesting. But absolutely the opposite has been true. And every year there's more and more research about the benefits of heat therapy, heat shock proteins, creating more sensitivity to important hormones like insulin and leptin, basically improving your sugar metabolism, improving your body's endocrine balance. It's really, really good for you. Now, it's extreme. So for some people with heart conditions or blood pressure issues, or just people at a certain age, too young or too old, it's not gentle at all. But it's really, really good for you. And there's more and more research, which is, to my surprise and to my good fortune, because I've put most of my career, I've spent a bunch of time doing hot yoga and hot yoga trainings and things like this. Here's the thing in breathing, it's the exact same rule applies. But you're right. Hot yoga, one of the things that hot yoga does is it challenges you in a way that usually takes. The story I always tell is if you have somebody walk into an Ashtanga class or a Vinyasa class their first time, they will walk out feeling frustrated and stiff. That will be their main response, because they teacher shows a side angle pose or a back bend or whatever it is, and they just feel like they can't do it. They don't get sweaty and they don't get tired. They just feel super frustrated. It's like a puzzle they can't do. And then 6 months into it or a year into it, they start to have these really, really great connections, these mind-body connections, and they're sweating and they're breathing, and they get it, and they get that sort of buzz from yoga, the nervous system training that we're looking for, by the way. But with hot yoga, you get it within the first 3 or 4 minutes class, because it superimposes that experience on you. It's like a shortcut. It's like a Cliff's Notes. It just takes you there right away. If you don't breathe, you'll die. Literally, like you felt you were going to pass out. I have passed out before. So it's a really, really interesting human experiment in terms of getting people to a state very, very quickly. It's like playing a song, the right song at the right party. It just makes everybody jump up and down. Playing heat in a room with a bunch of people looking in a mirror, it works. It gets people in the right place really, really fast. And some interesting things happen, and it challenges your breath, absolutely. For hot yoga students, we don't want to use Ujjayi breath, but that doesn't matter. Again, tons of different great breathing practices, hundreds of them, thousands of them. All of them are worth learning, but none of them are worth learning if you don't understand the fundamentals, which is rate is the most important thing. And you need to be breathing about 4 to 6 breaths per minute is your target. In order to do that, really simple things, you just count in your head. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. The inhale's more difficult. The exhale you'll be able to nail every time, but that inhale you really have to focus and not pull the air in faster. And if you focus on that breathing rate, that'll hit most people right around 4 to 6 breaths per minute, and that's your target. Whether you're in hot yoga, whether you're in a Shivananda class or an Ashtanga class, whatever you're up to.
So us advanced practitioners maybe need to eat a slice of humble pie and start really counting out our breaths again, knowing that we have the tendency to not breathe as hard just because yoga has become so easy for us. And I'm going to take this onto my mat as soon as we stop this call. So I'm excited about that. I want to ask you about breathing in and out through the nose. I know we both train other teachers, and this comes up in every teacher training I teach. People want to know, well, why? Why do you breathe in and out through the nose? And I think a lot of us aren't as well equipped to answer this question as we should be. I want to hear your take on it.
There's a number of different reasons, one of which is newer, which I don't know as much about, which I'll share with you in a moment. But on a most obvious level, what we're doing in yoga class is extended nervous system training, and we get this added benefit of strength and flexibility thrown in as well. That's what we're doing. If we were just looking to train strength, go to CrossFit. You're going to get better results. If you're just looking to do mobility or flexibility, probably go to gymnastics or some kind of acrobatics. You probably get better results. The most interesting thing about yoga is the nervous system training, and that the strength and the flexibility elements are thrown into the mix to challenge our nervous system, to challenge our breath. Because when we breathe as if we're cool, calm, and collected, when we're in a very stressful situation, let's call it a full wheel pose, or let's call it a pigeon pose, or whatever it is, when you feel super stressed out and you breathe as if you're cool, calm, and collected, your nervous system responds in kind, and neurons that fire together, wire together slowly but surely. When people say, I feel like my yoga practice, and it's helping me with the stress in my workplace or my relationship or my house or with my kids or whatever it is, that's what's happened. There's the magic is in that nervous system training. And so you will never find somebody who's cool, calm, and collected breathing through their mouth. It just doesn't happen unless they're sick, right? Sick people breathe through their mouth. In fact, mouth breathing is associated with a lot of different illnesses. Mouth breathing at night is one of the quickest ways to screw up your endocrine system. If you are a mouth breather, if you know somebody who snores or breathes through their mouth, it's something you really want to take care of very quickly. It can cause weight gain, elevated cortisol levels, all kinds of things. Mouth breathing is important at specific times, like when you just finished a 500-meter sprint, not when you're doing a triangle pose. It's just not appropriate. So if you breathe as if you just finished a 500-meter sprint and you just did a triangle pose, you're training your nervous system to overreact to mild stresses, which is the opposite of what we're trying to do. And so that's the fundamental reason. Nervous system training, more than anything, we want to create this yin-yang balance, this ha-tha balance, this strength flexibility balance, and that comes through nose breathing. More interestingly, there's nitrous oxide that's released when you breathe through your nose that isn't breathed as much when you breathe through your mouth. This is all new research to me. I've only learned about this recently, and so I don't have a ton to share, but that's interesting in terms of vasodilation, these kinds of things as well. But the bigger reason is really just this breathing as if, and it's the simplest way to think about it. What nervous system state am I mimicking when I'm breathing? And if I'm mimicking a car accident while I'm in a triangle pose, well, I'm training my nervous system to react in a really inappropriate way.
One thing I also often mention to students, which I'm wondering if you'd agree with, is that the little cilia, the little hairs in your nose, also sort of serve to warm and moisten the breath as it comes in. And I don't know if that's also a benefit, but it's something I also share with them. I think the nervous system answer really, really does make a lot of sense. And talking now about our nostrils, I know you wanted to share with us about how to do what you call a nostril check to see what activities were maybe best suited to do in a given moment, like if we should hop on the computer or maybe go for a run. Will you tell us more about that?
People talk about the science of yoga, but nobody actually references any science. I'm not sure why. I mean, there's whole books called The Science of Yoga where there's no science. I don't know what's happened. It's like the biggest pseudoscience ever. It's a big unfunny joke, but there's something called the nasal cycle. This was discovered in 1895 by a German physician. His name's Richard Kaiser. And here's how it works. It's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty accurate. About 90% of people I find can get really great insight into their nervous system just by sticking their finger under their nose. So here's what you do. Take your finger and put it under your nose, right? Like if you had a mustache, and then exhale a few times pretty strongly through your nose. What we're looking for is to figure out which nostril the air is flowing through more strongly. So is your right nostril more dominant, or is your left nostril more dominant? For about 90% of people, it's very clear which one is dominant. Some people will have allergies, they'll have a deviated septum, they'll have funny nostril things, they'll be congested or whatever it is. But for about 90% of people, they can feel right away that one nostril is more dominant. Right nostril corresponds with left brain. Right nostril corresponds with your sympathetic nervous system, with fight or flight, with go, 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 with go out and hunt your food, with answer 20 emails in your inbox, with organizing your desk. Left nostril is associated with your parasympathetic nervous system, rest and digest, fall asleep, fall in love, rest after a meal. Creative work, creative problem solving. Your body a healthy nervous system wants to flip back and forth from your sympathetic to your parasympathetic, from your right nostril to your left nostril, from go, 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 fight or flight to rest and digest. Creative thinking about every 90 to 120 minutes, every couple of hours, basically, all throughout the day. What happens is as soon as you tell people right nostril is fight or flight and left nostril is rest and digest, people immediately want to attach a value judgment. They want to go, oh, yeah, right nostril, I'm terrible. That's not what it is. They're both good. Yin is good, yang is bad. Ha is good, tha is good. It's strength, flexibility. We need them all. But what we don't need is to be cranked up all day long on sugar, caffeine, blue light, violent television, crisis news network, all these kinds of things. And so for the most part, what we're trying to do is restore that balance, focus on that water breath, focus on bringing that natural cycle, the ebb and the flow, right nostril to left nostril, sympathetic to parasympathetic. And the reason this is important for you listening, aside from just being a yoga nerd, is when you start to do this, you'll get some insight. Whenever you're starving hungry, you will always be in your right nostril. Always, 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 because your body's ready to go out and chase a rabbit and pull it over the head. Sorry to be graphic, but that's the way we are wired. We are cavemen at heart. When you feel yourself nodding off at work, when you can't keep your eyes open, take a check, you'll always be in your left nostril. When you cannot fall asleep and your mind is spinning and you're anxious and you're nervous, check your nose, you'll be in your right nostril. That's sympathetic, that's go, go, go. And when you feel yourself feeling love and creativity and relaxation and warmth and family, you'll always be in your left nostril. Now, these are just fun facts. These are just little things you can learn. What's interesting is when you take this knowledge and then you shift it. You're already doing this. This is the thing. You're already doing this with Starbucks and Haagen-Dazs and other in alcohol and all these other tools we have. Unconsciously, you're using these tools to mess with your autonomic nervous system. I want to encourage you to add some consciousness. So understand what's really going on. Am I in my sympathetic or my parasympathetic, my right nostril or my left nostril? And where would I like to be? So if you're about to go to bed and you just watched, Walking Dead, zombies getting their heads smashed or whatever, and you realize you're in your right nostril and it's 12:30 at night and you have to be up at 5:30 in the morning. Really interesting when you can do 10 rounds of breath that encourage left nostril dominance, encourage right brain activity, encourage rest and digest, encourage alpha brainwave states, and help you go to sleep. It's like 10 breaths. It's faster than a Valium. It's faster than 2 glasses of wine. It won't give you a hangover. And this is where things get really interesting. And so the first step to affecting your nervous system is understanding where it's at. And you can get some really great insights about sleep and wakefulness and sleepiness, about meal times, and about exercise. Those are the 3 times when people find this most interesting.
So one of the things I often tell students, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this, is that you can do Surya Badana or Chandra Badana to help encourage the switch of which nostril is dominant and therefore shift into parasympathetic or sympathetic nervous system appropriately. But with all the new information we're learning from you today, I have a feeling that you would expand upon that and say, no, you really want to focus on the rate of breath. Is that correct?
So the number one, your highest leverage point is absolutely how fast or how slow you're breathing. Every time, always, no matter what. But you can also affect it simply by preferring a nostril. So if you look at most pranayama practices, even like a classically taught Nadi Shodhana alternate nostril, you still end on the left nostril. And there's a reason for that. It's because almost all practices out there tend to err on the side of downregulation, tend to err on the side of rest and digest. And so there's lots of different practices you can use. But yes, just breathing out of your left nostril. So outside of yoga circles, sometimes sleep experts will just say, if you want to fall asleep, just plug your right nostril and just sit there for a while and breathe through your left nostril. And that absolutely does help. That can really be a big help. Sometimes people they'll sleep on the right side, which can help you to breathe through your left nostril as well. But you get a lot more leverage from starting with the rate. Ratio of breath, nostril preference with breath, those are important, but not nearly as important as starting with the rate. So you start with the biggest leverage, which is slow your breath way, way down. And then from there, you can superimpose a lot of different practices. The ones you mentioned are great practices as well.
And would perhaps, just to tap a little bit into ratio, extending the exhale, if we wanted to calm down at night, would perhaps be appropriate as the length and extension of the exhale, I was always taught, is associated with stimulating that rest and digest function.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And again, people tend to think this is woo-woo, but it's not at all. And so in a healthy person, when you inhale, your heart literally speeds up every breath. A healthy heart, when you inhale, it goes brum, and when you exhale, it goes bum, bum. That's heart rate variability. When you put a chest strap on and you see that number that says 60 beats per minute, that's an average. What's actually happening in a healthy heart, not an unhealthy heart, but in a healthy individual, is every single breath in and out, your heart heart is changing. The reason being is, what happens if you're walking in San Francisco and you step out into the road and an Uber comes at you, you go, right? You take a breath in and you want your nervous system to react really, really quickly. And what happens if, the man or woman of your dreams, calls you on the phone or sends you that message and, it's just the sweetest thing in the world? Nobody exhales. Nobody inhales. Everybody exhales. You go, right? And so it's very, very real. When you exhale, your heart rate literally slows down if your heart's healthy. And so just as we can breathe through our left nostril to accentuate our parasympathetic nervous system, we can also just spend more time exhaling. That works too. So doubling the rate of your exhale to your inhale, meaning hanging out more in the yin than the yang, increasing the amount of time spent on your exhale, it also helps. We want to start with the highest leverage, which is great. And then from there, absolutely playing with the ratio, meaning the length of your exhalation to your inhalation, and then playing with different breathing patterns, which will tend to emphasize either right, left nostril or left nostril. It's really, really, really helpful.
I want to ask you before we end our time together about this concept of oxygen in the blood. So I think we've all been in a yoga class where we're doing breath of fire or sometimes called shining skull breath, depending where you are, but Kapalabhati, and they're saying this breath is so good because it's oxygenating the blood. And I know you have some perspective for us on that, where you want to tell us a little bit about how we are actually maybe manipulating carbon dioxide in the blood and how that actually might be more important.
So yoga teachers say this all the time. This yoga breath, you're pumping, the thing I hear a lot is you're pumping fresh oxygenated blood throughout your body. And I think it comes from Bikram dialogue from years and years ago, which it's gotten into every yoga teacher's vocabulary around the world because Bikram has been so influential. But this idea of fresh oxygenated blood is just not true. For $20 on Amazon, you can get something called a blood oximeter. It measures your pulse, and it also measures the percentage of oxygen in your blood. The reason I mention this is because when I say this stuff, it's like heresy. People are like, everything you're saying is lies, Lucas. I've been practicing yoga for 20 years. You're a fool and a liar. And I was like, listen, just spend $20, get this thing on Amazon. This is real. Science of yoga doesn't exist. Nobody's bothered. I am not a scientist. I am not that educated at all. I've just done a little bit of research, and here's what I found. Most yoga breathing decreases the oxygen in your blood. I'm going to say that again. It's Freaky Friday, right? And most yoga breathing decreases the oxygen saturation in your blood. Most of you listening right now are somewhere between 95 and 99%. Most of you probably 97 to 99%. Anywhere in the 95 to 99% saturation range is absolutely normal and healthy. As you get into a yoga class, if you're doing yoga breathing properly, 4 to 6 breaths per minute, your blood oxygen saturation will go down, not up. Why? You are breathing more slowly. It's obvious. Think about it, right? You are breathing less. Why would more oxygen go into your body? It won't. It doesn't. Here's what does happen, which is really, really interesting. The carbon dioxide level goes up, right? When we breathe quickly, it's for our body to get rid of CO2. That's what happens. Like that sprinter we keep referencing, that guy who just did that 500-meter sprint, he gets done. His body's just trying to get rid of that CO2. His muscles, everything's just throwing off CO2. He's got to get rid of that stuff really, really quickly. So when we breathe slowly, we get a buildup of CO2. We think of CO2 as a toxin, but it's not true. Yin and yang, ha and tha, it's all about balance. We need that CO2. Here's what it does. A couple of interesting things. So carbon dioxide, again, we think of it as a bad thing, but what it does is it's a vasodilator. It's a bronchial dilator. It opens up your breathing passageways. It opens up your throat. It opens up your veins. A lot of people with asthma actually use yoga style breathing to stop using inhalers altogether. It's that effective. It's really, really profound how quickly you can dilate your bronchial, your breathing passageways, your nasal passageways, your veins. And the other thing it does is it allows hemoglobin to give off its oxygen. So even though there's less oxygen in your blood itself, your blood is throwing oxygen into your body, into your cells at a much higher rate. This is where it gets kind of confusing. People are like, Lucas, well, isn't that the same thing? No, it's not the same thing, because in yoga breathing, your blood oxygen is going down and the oxygen availability is going up, but you're not pumping oxygen into your body, not at all. You're more than anything, you're relaxing, opening your air passageways, and you're allowing the oxygen that's already in your blood, which is more than enough, 95 to 99% is more than enough. You're allowing that oxygen to release give your body access. So when we talk about this idea of fresh oxygen and breathing and yoga breathing and oxygen, it's really silly. We're not really manipulating oxygen much at all. We're manipulating CO2, which has a very profound impact on our blood pH. It's a really profound impact on our body's its utilization, its availability to access that oxygen that's already in your blood. And again, it sounds like a small distinction, but it's an important one because most yoga teachers are teaching this completely backwards. They're saying, use yoga breathing. When you breathe really slow, it gets more oxygen. It's not what's happening. When you breathe really slow, it allows your body to use what it already has. In the same way that when you balance your hormones, it allows your body to use the fat that's already stored. It doesn't make you just burn more calories or something like that. It just allows your body to act more optimally.
It's more efficient.
Exactly.
I love this. And I want to make sure for myself personally, I really nail this when talking about breath of fire. Can you tell us a little bit about breath of fire specifically? And it's the same concept, I'm guessing, correct?
Yeah, so all the breathing patterns, just like all the poses, they're just there to challenge us. They're there to challenge our nervous system. And so whether we're doing breath of fire or Nadi Shodhana, or we're just making up some other breathing pattern on our own, which is perfectly fine to do, by the way, it doesn't really matter. With breath of fire, this is one that I use a lot. We use this in the opening of all of our classes. This is a sharp exhale through your nose. It sounds like this. It's like a sneeze where you just exhale, you don't inhale. The inhale happens all on its own from the vacuum that's created. We do that at a rate of at least 20 breaths per minute. Usually we do more like 40 or 60 breaths per minute. And we do it really sparingly. So we do this probably 3 rounds of 20 is what we'll usually use in our classes. If you do this for extended periods of time, it can be kind of dangerous. So people like in Kundalini yoga classes, they'll do this. In things like holotropic or Wim Hof breathing, they'll do our extended controlled hyperventilation, and it can cause anxiety attacks in a pretty significant number of people. And so I always encourage people to be very cautious with controlled hyperventilation, but use sparingly. Kapalabhati breath is a really great way to shift your body into a sympathetic fight or flight mode, which is great for the start of your yoga practice. You want to be in your right nostril. You want to be in fight or flight mode. You want to be in go, go, go mode. And breath of fire, Kapalabhati Kriya, it's actually a cleansing practice, is a really great way to kick things off. And so it's a great practice to use in the morning as well. If you're trying to kick things like coffee, if you're trying to reduce caffeine and that 100 grams of sugar most people slam in their diet for breakfast, this can be a really helpful one to wake up your nervous system naturally. And so all of these practices are wonderful to learn. Just remember that you just remember to back them out and say, hey, what am I actually doing here with the rate at which I'm breathing? Am I doing water, whiskey, or coffee? If I understand that, in that context, all of these practices can be really healthful and helpful once I put them in their place.
Right, because in doing Kapalabhati, the inhale is passive, and we know when we inhale, it's when we get all the oxygen. So it doesn't make sense that so many teachers, including myself in the past, have cued it that way. So I'm so glad that you're bringing this to our attention. I know we're going to close with you leading us through just a quick little 5-minute meditation, which I'm super excited about. Before we do that, I can't let you go because I'm enjoying this conversation so much without asking you about breath retention and the bandhas and what sort of happens in the body when we retain our breath, and your thoughts about if this is something that's beneficial for us or not according to the science and research you've looked at.
Breath retention is another play with CO2, and you'll see teachers saying the same thing. Like when you hold your breath, you get tons of oxygen in your blood. It doesn't make any sense. And if you just stick that $20 blood oximeter, you watch your blood oxygen just topple. And if you're really advanced at breathing, you can get it really, really low. You get it down to the 80s or even 70 percentile, which is really quite low. And the other people who do interesting work with breath, who know a lot more than yoga students, are free divers, by the way, apnea, people who practice apnea. So if you're interested in learning, don't look to the yoga people because you'll just get misinformation. I don't know why it's been lost in the tradition. In terms of retention, the purpose of retention is to play with CO2 at an even deeper level. People will often teach, before a busy meeting, the key thing to do is like strike your warrior pose and take like 3 big breaths. It's like, that's a terrible idea. That's a terrible idea. You're super nervous. You're all cranked up already. And the advice is to crank yourself up more. It doesn't make any sense, right? A much better thing, if somebody's freaking out, they're panicked, if they're on the side of the road and they're having an anxiety attack, like literally just hold your breath. That's a better thing. And if you see what paramedics do, they hand people a paper bag. Why? What are they rebreathing in that bag? It's not oxygen.
It's CO2.
That CO2 relaxes you like a drug, literally like a drug, relaxes you in a moment. And so when you play with retention, you're playing with CO2. You're also training your body to be comfortable at a higher CO2 tolerance. When you go underwater in the swimming pool and you feel breath hunger, meaning you feel like, oh, I need to breathe, and you're gasping for air, that hunger comes from CO2 levels high, not from low oxygen. And as you get more and more comfortable with higher levels of CO2, you can stay down longer safely. This is when people get tolerance to CO2. You can do the same thing through yoga breathing, is you get tolerance to it in the same way that somebody who practices intermittent fasting can get totally comfortable feeling slight hunger for a few hours per day. No big deal at all. So when we're playing with retention, this is what we're doing, is we're doing a deep dive into CO2 play. And we could do this by breathing super slowly, or we could do it with breath retention. It's a great practice specifically for downregulating your nervous system, for getting that parasympathetic nervous system going, for knocking yourself out at night, for managing stress and anxiety, for helping with your digestion, because again, parasympathetic, rest and digest, all the blood flows to your digestive system. And it's kind of an advanced way to club yourself over the head, essentially. As you get deeper and deeper into it, as your tolerance to CO2 goes up and up, you're able to hold your breath for a shockingly long period of time very quickly. Most people that I'll do in workshops can get up to 2-minute breath holds, even if they've never done any breath holding at all. And many people can get 3-4 minute breath holds, no problem.
What's your thought on retention on the exhale? So holding the breath out of the body.
Couple of things. First of all, it's much easier on the inhale. So
yeah,
apnea people and things like that, they'll do it on the inhale because then they can stay down longer. Obviously, it just makes sense, right? You take a big breath of air, it's there. You also just don't feel that sort of physiological emptiness. So there's a mental component too. Typically, retention on the exhale is taught as an advanced technique because it does make you much more susceptible to anxiety and things like this.
Right. As humans, we're so much more frightened of not getting that inhale, right?
There is, in the Buteyko tradition, they do, which again was developed by this medical doctor to treat asthma, they do always practice on the exhale. And they also do this in Wim Hof as well. And a lot of techniques, they do it as well. I've never heard of a good reason why, except one, and this is this idea that nitrous oxide builds up in your nasal passageways. And again, I hesitate to talk about this because it's a new concept that I don't know that much about. But the idea is that vasodilator, that relaxant, builds up in your nose, specifically in your nasal passageways. And so when you finally do take that inhale, after a long period of retention on the exhale, you get a little hit of that. I don't know enough about that to say anything definitive, but that's the only thing that I've ever heard of a good reason why, except for just to challenge yourself, because it is much more challenging. And obviously the CO2 builds up much more quickly when you have less volume, when everything's empty.
Lucas, this has been so informative and wonderful. Are you willing to offer us just a quick little closing? We can call it a meditation or a breathing exercise or whatever you like, just to sort of solidify some of the concepts we've talked about today.
Sure, I'll teach you just a really simple, this water breathing, which is so simple that none of you are going to be excited about it. But if you practice, I promise you, exciting things will happen in your life. Let your breathing be boring, your life be exciting. If your breathing is the most exciting thing in your life, you need to get out more and do some more fun things. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this water breathing practice. And again, the rate that we're looking for is 4 to 6 breaths per minute. The cool thing about this is you can do this while driving. You can do this while listening to this show. You can do this anytime, day or night. It's adaptogenic, meaning if you're up, it'll bring you down. If you're down, it'll bring you up. Always a good idea. This is the rate at which you should practice your yoga. This is the rate at which you should look for before a busy meeting. This is the rate you should focus on right after a meal. Water breath, always a great idea. We're going to do a 4-4 count. I'll count. You breathe. Eyes are open if you're driving. Otherwise, close your eyes. We're breathing through our nose. Inhale through your nose. Inhaling 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Do one more round. Inhale 1, 2, 3, 4. Exhale 4, 3, 2, and 1. Great. That's it. So we did 5 rounds there. I would typically recommend you do at least 10 rounds. And if you're having trouble with stress or anxiety, if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you can't sleep, you could just carry on. Sometimes I'll do as many as 30 rounds. I get a lot of anxiety, especially at night, and I'll do that before bed. And it can be a really, really great way to balance out your nervous system. And again, I know people are listening are going, that's it. I just listened to this guy babble on about breath. And then he just wants me to inhale 4, exhale 4. Can't I do something funny with my fingers? Can't I make some sacred mudra or chant Shiva or something like that? And the answer is yes, you can do all that stuff. But that is all just window dressing on the underlying principle, which is water, whiskey, coffee. What are you doing? If you get established in that, you can play with all the other window dressings you want, and that'll be fun and that'll be interesting. But you got to get established in that base before you do anything.
Lucas, this has been so wonderful. I know people are going to want to connect with you and get to hear more of your perspective and your teaching. What's the best place for them to find you?
Usually, even though this concept is simple, people still forget the numbers. They still forget like 4 to 6 breaths. How much is that? So I put together a really simple one sheet where you can just download these 3 practices: water, whiskey, coffee. Go to yogabody.com/how to breathe, all one word, yogabody.com/how to breathe, or else just go to yogabody.com or yogatalkshow.com if you want to hear my wonderful monotone voice for endless hours of babble about breath and health and all this kind of stuff.
Thank you so much. I'm off to my yoga mat now to make sure I absolutely breathe at the correct rate during the vinyasa portion of my practice. Lucas, thanks again, and let's talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brett.
Thank you so much for listening all the way to the very end. If you enjoyed this conversation with Lucas, jump on over to the Facebook group Savannah East, where we'll be posting many of the things he mentioned in this podcast and resources for you, as well as the link where you can get the breathing guide. And I'd love to hear from you. Did you find some of the content of this podcast shocking, exciting? What are your thoughts on the breath and the research and the myths that are out there? Definitely hop over to the Facebook group to tell us your thoughts. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and from my heart to yours, namaste. Hi everyone, Brett here with an announcement. We are starting a weekly contest giveaway over at Savannah Spirit. If you'd like to enter the contest to win one of our weekly prizes, go to savannahspirit.com/contest. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, would really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes and left us a review, leave us some comments. We love your feedback, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might also enjoy it. I also wanted to invite you to go check out Savannah East, which is the name of our blog, and also the name of our Facebook group, where you can ask questions, see who's coming on the show, and share your ideas. We will post the most recent episodes there, as well as interesting articles relating to our guests and topics on the shows. Again, thank you so much for listening, and from my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaheast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.